Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. As we look to a future where oil and gas prices are rising, we're going to be looking for alternatives that are not only less expensive, but don't come from all the way across the world. My guest today is talking about one such alternative. This is Ron Cole, who's a retired businessman from Ukiah. Thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
Ron, you're demonstrating something very unusual, something actually very new on the horizon called MagneGas. But before we talk about that, tell us how you got into showing us, prototyping demonstrating this new technology.
I've been retired about 2 years from small business. I was originally in the U.S. Navy as a reactor operator, so I developed a touch with technology that I wouldn't have had otherwise in the nuclear power program. And as I began to look for alternatives actively after retirement, I found one by an Italian-American in Florida called Dr. Santilli. And that process that he had developed and the mathematics that preceded it was called MagneGas.
MagneGas, M-A-G-N-E-G-A-S. What does that stand for? What is MagneGas?
MagneGas is spelled with an E because the gas fuel is produced magnetically by an electric arc.
Aha. And what is that fuel like? What is it anything we could relate to?
The fuel is actually made from water, but the water can be contaminated. It doesn't have to be clean. The submerged electric arc breaks it into a new form of matter, plasma, which is then condensed into carbon, hydrogen, oxygen atoms in a fuel that is very similar, has similar qualities to natural gas.
All right, so we're looking at a new fuel, similar to natural gas.
That's right.
So I'm going to jump ahead for a second, so where we could use natural gas now, this could replace that.
That's correct.
Okay. Why don't we start with taking a look at a demonstration of all the gear, the stuff that it takes to do this. This is a plasma arc
flow recycler.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at that.
Okay. The process of making a non-polluting fuel called MagneGas begins with the choice of wastes. This could be tap water because the fuel is actually made from water. Any kind of liquid waste, toxic or organic, can be converted to a non-polluting fuel by simply pumping it into the system, spraying it into an arc, and the arc will break the material down into atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. These atoms have a new shape, and with new shapes come new properties. The central process in making this fuel is in this module here. The pumps are used to bring the liquid level of the waste up to about this level, which extends across to the main tower here. Below this level, we have liquid waste. Above it, we have room to accumulate the magnetic gas. The way we convert it to gas is by using a carbon electrode about 1.5 inches in diameter and another anode, carbon anode, down here. Machinery is used to bring the upper anode down and touch the lower one, at which point an arc is struck. The arc is 7,000 to 10,000 degrees. The liquid is then forced into the arc, at which point, at that temperature, they all become ions, ionic material. They're forced on through the arc into the cooler liquid on the other side, at which point they recondense into a new form of matter. We call that matter MagneGas. The MagneGas effervesces and accumulates in the gaseous area up here. Then it goes up through this pipe and out through the far side of the main tower and is collected. The collection process goes on until it reaches 15 pounds per square inch, and then a compressor picks that gas up, which is down here, and raises the pressure of that fuel to 3,000 psi. The level of the liquid in the main tower is indicated by this gauge here, which is called a Hall gauge. It's electronic and lets you know the proper level, even though that's maintained automatically. I can use this magnet because this is stainless steel, which is non-magnetic, and inside is a float, which is magnetic. So if I don't have any electricity to work with, All I have to do is follow this down, and that's the level. The first step in the process is to charge the liquid waste into the system. So I'm going to push this button and start up the pump, and that will fill the system with liquid waste. At the same time, you'll watch the liquid level in the reservoir drop. What we've accomplished in just a few minutes, it takes nature millions of years to do. We've taken a liquid waste, converted it into a gaseous fuel with properties similar to natural gas. 1 cubic foot of city sewage actually gets transformed into 5 gallons of gasoline in terms of energy equivalent. This gaseous fuel is drawn off the top here and accumulated in low pressure expansion tanks, which are currently at 10 psi, 10 pounds per square inch. As soon as they reach 15 pounds per square inch, a 4-stage compressor in the front of the trailer comes on automatically and begins to fill high pressure tanks underneath the trailer. The reason for the high pressure, which is 3,000 pounds per square inch, is to allow us to fill up a car, the car that's on the back here, or any car that runs on natural gas. The filler hose is identical to those used in compressed natural gas service stations. This is a bi-fuel Ford Contour that I bought off of eBay. You can fill it on with gasoline on one side or natural gas on the other. Any car that runs on natural gas will run on MagneGas. So now we've got a high pressure coupling and we're ready to add fuel to the high pressure fuel tank. Fill up complete.
So that's really, I mean, that's a fascinating sort of process that you've got just on a truck bed there. How much could you convert? I mean, you're looking at a small system right there.
That's right. My system demonstrates proof of principle, but a normal industrial model would be not any larger. It's just beefier looking. And it would convert about in 1 hour, it would produce about 6 gallons of gasoline, equivalent in terms of energy.
6 gallons.
So in a 24-hour period, a small or medium-sized recycler would make 250 gallons equivalent of gas in terms of energy.
Which could take care of everybody on your block for a week or two, or
right.
for their gasoline type of use, or heating, as in natural gas or propane heating, or cooking, or those
Correct.
other kinds of uses. Taking a look at that whole process here, you're starting with liquid. In this case, we started with sewage.
Right.
That could have heavy metals. It could have toxins in it. What kind? I want to ask on both ends. When you go to the end fuel, what kind of emissions are we looking at in comparison? We've still got some greenhouse gases that are coming out from this process. Yes.
You have carbon, atoms of carbon coming out, and when they combust, they do produce carbon dioxide. The rate of carbon dioxide production is half of that of gasoline, and 1/3 of that of natural gas.
So though we have emissions, they're considerably less. So it doesn't give us totally clean in terms of greenhouse gases, but a whole lot better.
That can be adjusted. The fuel can be custom made with water alone, and the only carbon involved is the carbon from the carbon electrodes. And so you can adjust the amount of greenhouse gases in this fuel.
What happens to the other atoms when you go through this process? If there's other heavy metals or other toxic substances, what happens in that combustion process?
They stay bound up in the liquid, and then the liquid is separated on the output end by a centrifuge. So the heavy metals and carbon are sequestered in a carbon sand that it accumulates at the rate of about 5 pounds per week. It's very, very little. And that is used for reconstituting new carbon rods.
So what you have then in terms of recycling is that the two carbon rods that come together and create this arc inside the liquid,
Right.
you can use some of your waste material, if you will, to remake, to make new carbon rods.
That's correct.
What happens at this magic point? I think that's where the new chemistry or the new physics is sitting, right?
That's right.
Tell us about that.
As the sewage waste, and in this case, septic sewage is slightly different than city sewage. City sewage does have heavy metals associated in it because of industrial customers. Septic sewage is much cleaner, much more organic.
Relatively cleaner.
Right. And so that liquid, that homogeneous liquid, is forced into the arc, raised to 7,000 to 10,000 degrees by the arc. And within the intense magnetic field inside that arc, that plasma converts the atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to a new shape. And as they're forced on through the arc into the cooler liquid on the far side, they recondense in that new shape, which is a donut shape, rather than a spherical shape. And because this new shape, with this new shape comes new properties. The gas is very, very stable, despite the fact that it has its own oxygen mixed with it. And it has much higher power density than hydrogen, for instance. So it's a very practical fuel.
Much higher energy capability than hydrogen alone.
Higher density, right? Twice, more than twice.
So we're sitting, I mean, we're at the edges here. We're talking about new mathematics, new molecular properties. Is that right?
That's
a new
correct.
chemistry, at least.
A new chemistry.
What basis do we have for, what's that based on, I should say? I mean, other than somebody's waving their hands, there's got to be something here.
Right. During Jimmy Carter's administration, he encouraged people to develop a new and clean fuels. And so he actively solicited the help of this Italian physicist to develop new clean energies and fuels. And $26 million grant was given to Dr. Santilli, who took 20 years to publish and rework quantum physics, so that he was able to develop new fuels which conventional chemistry is incapable of developing. So that entire 20 years was spent just developing the mathematics for this. And after that was done, he found that the mathematics could define the shapes of these subatomic and atomic particles. And therefore, he could predict what the new properties would be, and he could make a custom-made non-polluting fuel from that new chemistry.
Which is which he then had to prototype.
That's right. He spent another 10 years developing the machinery that would provide this at an industrial rate.
How? I'm trying to think of this. When you take, I want to think about this as a whole system of producing. It takes energy and it produces energy, right? So when you look at the whole works here, there's a lot of electricity has to be generated to create that arc.
Correct.
And I noticed that you have a welder is creating that arc.
That's right.
So we're not doing anything fancy and different in that regard. When you look at the electricity that's put in to do that and to do your gas compression and whatever else I can't think of there, the electricity that you need to run this, and then you have to think about how much energy is returned in gas. Besides, in the whole systems look at this, you've also got excess heat, right, created from your arc.
Right.
What happens, is there a way to reuse that heat? Is that in the plans so that this is, how do I say, so that you get the highest return on energy?
Right.
How does that work? How could that work?
Part and parcel of this technology requires that it be used with sustainable electricity. So in Ukiah, we have a 3 megawatt hydropower plant which for our first system here, I intend to use that sustainable electricity. But on the horizon, there are some exciting new developments in vertical axis wind turbines and other things of this nature that I believe we have enough wind in this country to provide all of the fuel that we need for transportation. In the Dakotas, for instance. This is documented by the book Natural Capitalism, done by the Rocky Mountain Institute.
However, there's always, of course, with renewable energy, it could be used, the electricity can come from renewable or non-renewable sources. It's still, we need that electricity in here. Is there any way that somebody's thinking about using the excess heat from that system and using it in part to generate electricity, or to use the heat in some other form, so it's not wasted?
Our particular unit makes this fuel and heats water to about 300 degrees. Normally, this temperature differential of 300 degrees is not sufficient to run American industry, or modern industry. Recently, however, there is a person who has developed an engine which will run at 165 degrees of heat. So that means that our waste heat, which is an enormous amount, it's like 100 horsepower worth of heat, but because it's the low temperature, was previously unusable, can now be usable. That heat will simply run an engine, which will run a generator, which will provide a large portion, probably 2/3 of the amount of energy required to generate our fuel.
So when you create one, take one, what kind of equivalence, starting from your water source to your end source, what kind of return do we have here in terms of usable fuel? I think you mentioned it while we were doing the demonstration, but tell me again. If you put in 1 gallon of water.
If you put in 1 cubic foot of liquid waste, you will get out 1,000 cubic feet of fuel. 1,000 cubic feet of fuel has an energy equivalent of 5 gallons of gasoline. So 1 cubic foot of water will be equivalent in terms of energy to 5 gallons of gasoline.
That's a big differential. That's a big return.
It can be optimized. If you add oil to the water, such as French fry oil, which is the bane of most restaurants and things, it increases the power of the fuel, the energy content a lot.
Do you have any sense of? Is it 1.5 times, 2 times? Of course, it depends on how much oil you add. Of course, I'm sure.
Right. Well, it should not be more than 1/3 of the total for optimum energy production. But if in technical terms, the BTU, the gasoline gallon equivalent for sewage is 200 cubic feet per gallon gas equivalent. If you add oil, that raises you get 150 cubic feet for a gallon gas. So basically it takes less of the fuel, the gaseous fuel, for the same energy as gasoline has, than you would get with just sewage.
Okay.
Sewage is cleaner in terms of the oxygen-hydrogen balance, but it has lower energy density.
Well, we may let the folks who are doing biodiesel take the French fry oil, because there's certainly plenty of sewage.
And there's plenty of drain oil.
And drain oil and water for your process.
Right.
Right now you're at a prototyping stage. What's your vision of how this could be employed in communities and municipalities, and at what scales? What do you envision? You're working on a business plan for this, so this might be a bit about that.
So I've already asked the inventor to bring the unit back and to upgrade it to full industrial size, because it's not that much bigger. It will easily fit on the trailer. Well, then I've also applied to the local county planning with a proposal to put this in place here for the county septic haulers who are reaching a limit as to where they can dump their waste. So this would relieve that problem for them. We would also put up an CNG, or compressed natural gas, station to take the fuel and sell it retail for, say, $2 a gallon to people who had compressed natural gas vehicles. in the future, we do intend to emphasize the use of sustainable electricity to operate the whole thing.
So you also had mentioned to me on the side the notion that every community, not every block exactly, but that this doesn't need to be a centralized plant in one place per municipality necessarily. Tell us that kind of decentralized view, how it could work.
For this process can take place anywhere that there's water and electricity from solar or whatever source. So it doesn't have to have huge capital outlay in one central area, such as the Gulf Coast, where all of our fuel refining takes place. It can take place in every community, on every block, wherever it's zoned commercial, you can have one of these units. So the possibility of decentralizing and democratizing our fuel production system can be achieved by using this type of technology.
So in going back to what we were talking about, going to the municipality, I would expect that what other municipalities we will need is sort of that next step that you're wanting to take here in your county of doing a pilot program in which you test out all those parts. They see what kind of returns they're getting, how much sewage is being used. You also, so of course one of the major challenges, as the Hirsch report talks about, in terms of swapping to an alternate energy source, is the infrastructural question. Because we've already got gas stations, we've built that infrastructure for decades here.
That's right.
When you think about using the end product, the compressed natural gas, that's something I'm not very familiar with. Where can that be used in place of our propane tanks, or what needs to be done in that source? You mentioned compressed natural gas vehicles. Are they available? Tell us just a little bit of that. We have about 4 minutes left. Tell us about that part.
Most of the airports in the San Francisco Bay Area use compressed natural gas taxis. So it's far more extent than most people are aware of. In fact, Ukiah has, at its airport, has a compressed natural gas outlet. The natural gas grid that is nationwide in this country is $1 trillion infrastructure that can be used to simply distribute the energy as it's made during the night, or during periods when electricity is not that necessary. The ability of our present infrastructure to use natural gas far exceeds that of our present infrastructure to use hydrogen.
Well, yeah, we have nearly nothing for hydrogen.
Right. So an ordinary car can be converted to use natural gas or this MagneGas simply by adding a high-pressure tank and a regulator, the same way that they run current vehicles off of propane. How much
would that kind of conversion cost? Or do you have to have a special car for that, or does it take a lot of space? Or
no, the cost of converting it, if you consider just the components, is probably a $500 tank and maybe $200 regulator, and then the piping and the actual labor required to install it. Even so, it's probably a $3,000 investment. Currently, the only car manufacturer that is really pushing compressed natural gas is Honda. Although I must say that Toyota now has a compressed natural gas Prius, and a Camry. The Camry is available.
So if let's say in your community, that means that the airport has some outlet for compressed natural gas. I mean, I'm looking at, if you were to look to get a whole fleet of cars of this kind, you're going to need a facility that generates the compressed natural gas, right, which would come from your MagneGas recycler. We would need to have those distributed, throughout our towns and communities.
Correct.
Make sure I understand that they could either be done moving tanks, compressed tanks, and filling in at, say, a CNG transfer station or an outlet, or go through the natural gas grid that we already have.
That's right. So you can pop up at a natural gas or MagneGas station, or a blend, because they mix at any ratio. So anywhere you want a natural gas station, you simply locate it near a natural gas line, hook a compressor to it, and then raise it to the pressure that cars will run on.
Okay, so they have to be pressurized.
That's right.
From the, okay. So what's exciting about this is this sounds like the potential is there for something like our decentralized solar production. You know, everybody put a panel on their roof and tie it back into the grid, feed the grid, so that we've got excess. Except one difference is that we tend to supply it and use it most in the day. Here with natural gas, with your MagneGas, you can be generating that all day long, all night long, and continue to feed that natural gas
accumulating
supply for anyone.
Right. And as natural gas eventually declines in terms of volume, MagneGas can pick up the difference in a segue. So because the infrastructure is the same.
Which is a big factor here because in California, a lot of our electricity generation is coming from natural gas. And you're right, it's starting to decline. We're getting most of it from Canada, and they're starting to decline. And so we're looking at the lack of that resource as well.
So with no change in infrastructure, we can just keep rolling, but on a fuel that we actually make locally.
I would imagine that PG&E and other electric, you know, the purveyors of those natural gas-fired power plants ought to be taking a look at MagneGas as a potential to fill in that gap.
The forward-looking ones are. There have been some that are not forward-looking, but they're not a monolith.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Any last thing? We've got about a half a minute here. Anything that I've forgotten to ask you that you want to add about this? It's an amazing technology. You know,
Yeah.
I'm really hopeful that you're successful in. I do have one question. EPA, have you had to do any kind of certification in terms of the emissions and so on? Any of the regulations?
Tests were conducted on a MagneGas operated Honda. And so we already have EPA certification for the fuel, not for California, but for the nation.
Okay.
The last thing I'd like to say is that if we do come out with fuel cell cars that require hydrogen, MagneGas, because of its anomalous molecular structure, can simply be sent through a bath of liquid nitrogen, and everything liquefies except the hydrogen. Hydrogen comes out the other side. So you can very cheaply make hydrogen with this system.
That's another angle on this.
Right. So the fuel will not only fire our internal combustion engines for the next 10 or 20 years, it will also operate our fuel cell cars if that technology ever becomes cheap enough to afford.
Thank you. This is fascinating. This is hopeful. It gives me a sense that it's not all bleak as we get to the end of the peak oil curve.
Not at all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing this to us and to our viewers. Thank you for watching. This is Janaea Donaldson, and you're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses to a Changing Energy Future. Join us next time.